On how Jake McNiece used a Webley Mach-6 with steady hands to protect wounded men. The Webley Mach-6 sits heavy in Jake McNiece's palm, its British steel cold against his mud-caked fingers. Across the cratered Norman farmyard, 3 wounded men from the Filthy 13 lie bleeding behind a collapsed stone wall. Maddox with a shattered femur, Benson's lung punctured and wheezing, Kowalski's arm tourniqueted and bone-white. German voices drift through the fog, maybe 30 yards out, probing the hedgerows. McNiece crouches in the doorway of a burned-out barn, 6 rounds in the cylinder, no backup, no plan except the brutal mathematics of survival. He'd found the revolver hours earlier, clutched in the dead hand of a British glider pilot whose Horsa had cartwheeled into an apple orchard near Sainte-Mère-Église. The pilot's face was peaceful under the crumpled canopy, eyes closed, like he'd simply fallen asleep amid twisted aluminum and splintered wood. McNiece had taken the Webley without sentiment. His own M1911 lay somewhere in a flooded Normandy ditch, lost during the chaotic June 7th jump. Now this ghost of a gun, an officer's elegant sidearm built for another army's war, was all that stood between his men and the German patrol, closing through the morning mist. The wounded can't move. Maddox's femur is a shattered mess, bone fragments grinding with each shallow breath. Benson coughs wetly, pink foam at his lips, every inhale a rasp that says his time is measured in minutes, not hours. Kowalski stares at his mangled arm with the detached confusion of severe blood loss, tourniquet cinched so tight the fabric cut skin. They'd crawled to that wall while McNiece provided cover with a captured Car 98K until he'd burned through the last stripper clip. Now, it's geometry and nerve. 6 bullets, maybe a dozen Germans in the bocage. The math doesn't favor survival. McNiece's reputation in the 506th PIR is built on demolitions, TNT satchels, detonation cord, improvised charges set under fire while German patrols walked overhead. He's the man who can wire a bridge to blow with hands that never shake, who reads structures like field manuals and finds weak points in steel and stone. But this isn't demolition work. This is angles and timing. Precision shooting that requires what the Filthy 13 call his steady hands, the unnatural calm that settles over him when chaos peaks and other men freeze. The fog thickens. German voices grow clearer, clipped commands, boots squelching in mud, the metallic click of Mauser bolts working. They're sweeping methodically, searching for the paratroopers who ambushed their supply convoy at dawn. Behind McNiece, Maddox groans through gritted teeth. The sound cuts through the mist like a flare, and McNiece sees shapes moving in the hedgerow gaps, Feldgrau uniforms, helmets silhouetted against the grey morning. His thumb rests on the Webley's hammer. 6 rounds, 1 chance to make the geometry work. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. 12 hours earlier, McNiece's stick had scattered across Normandy's darkness like seeds thrown into a storm. The C-47 had taken flak over the Cotentin Peninsula, and the jump went to hell. Men tumbling out into tracer-lit sky, equipment bundles vanishing into flooded fields below, silk canopies tangling in trees and telephone wires. McNiece had landed hard in a hedgerow, harness caught on branches, dangling 3 feet above a muddy lane, while German voices shouted somewhere in the darkness. He'd cut himself down with his jump knife, gathered his demo kit, and started the long, disorienting work of finding his squad. By dawn, on June 7th, he'd collected 8 men from the Filthy 13, half his demolition section scattered across 3 miles of bocage country. They'd been briefed to link up with the 506th PIR near a road junction south of Sainte-Mère-Église, secure a farmhouse, and prepare charges for a bridge the brass expected German armor to use. Clean mission, simple orders. But Normandy had its own plans. The German convoy had appeared without warning. 3 trucks grinding up a narrow farm road, supply run or reinforcement, nobody knew. The paratroopers had no choice but to engage. McNiece had set a hasty ambush with what little they had. One bar, a few Thompsons, captured Mausers, and the last of their gammon grenades. The fight lasted maybe 4 minutes. Brutal, close-range chaos. 2 trucks burning, Germans scattering into hedgerows. And then the return fire, a hidden MG-42 opening up from a barn they hadn't spotted, tearing through the column. Maddox went down first, screaming as the bullet shattered his thigh. Benson took shrapnel to the chest when a grenade cooked off wrong. Kowalski's arm was nearly severed by a ricochet off stone. The other 5 paratroopers scattered under fire, dragging the wounded toward the nearest cover. The collapsed stone wall of a farmyard, a burned barn, anything. McNiece had stayed, firing the Kar 98K until it clicked empty, buying seconds while the others pulled their friends to cover. Now they're trapped. The other paratroopers are gone, scattered deeper into the bocage, trying to find the 506th PIR's main line, or dead in the hedgerows. McNiece doesn't know which. Radios smashed, no contact, no backup. Just him, 3 dying men, and a British officer's revolver that feels too light, too refined, too much like a gentleman's weapon for the kind of dirty, desperate work ahead. He checks the Webley's cylinder again. 6 brass cartridges, 4.55 caliber, heavy rounds built for British colonial wars. The revolver is old-fashioned, break action, slow to reload even if he had spare ammunition, which he doesn't. 6 shots total. The Germans are closing. McNiece can hear them communicating. Short bursts of German, hand signals through the fog. They know someone's here. They're being cautious. Smart. Boss. Maddox whispers from the wall, voice tight with pain. You gotta leave us. Get out. McNiece doesn't answer. He's watching the hedgerows, reading the terrain like he'd read a bridge for demolition, where pressure will come, where the structure will fail, where one precise action might hold everything together or bring it all crashing down. His hands rest steady on the Webley. 6 rounds, the geometry has to be perfect. The first German emerges from the hedgerow like a shadow taking form. Young face, maybe 19, Mauser held too tight at his shoulder, eyes scanning the fog with the jerky movements of someone who knows he's exposed. McNiece settles the Webley's sights, exhales slowly and squeezes. The revolver kicks, the German drops without a sound. McNiece shifts position immediately, moving left along the barn wall. The other Germans will rush toward the gunshot. He needs a new angle. 2 more shapes burst through the hedgerow gap, older soldiers experienced, moving in practiced coordination. McNiece fires twice, measured and deliberate. 1 round finds chest, the other shatters a shoulder. The wounded German screams high and raw, and his partner dives behind a water trough. McNiece counts rounds in his head. 3 spent, 3 left. The mathematics narrow with each trigger pull. Behind the stone wall, Maddox watches McNiece work. The demolition NCO's hands don't shake. Never do. Not when he's crimping blasting caps under artillery fire, not when he's setting charges on bridge pylons with German patrols 100 yards away, and not now, with 3 rounds left and at least 8 more Germans somewhere in the fog. Maddox has seen men praised as heroes freeze completely in moments like this, brains shutting down, hands trembling too badly to work a bolt or reload a magazine. But McNiece just moves through the chaos like he's following some invisible blueprint only he can see. The Germans go silent. They're adapting, flanking. McNiece hears movement to his right, boots in mud, gear rattling softly. They're trying to split his attention, force him to defend 2 approaches at once. Standard infantry tactics. And they're right, he can't cover both angles. If they rush together from different directions, the wounded men are dead, and McNiece with them. He makes a choice born from demolition instincts. Create chaos, force hesitation, buy time. He fires his 4th round into the water trough. Wood splinters and water spray erupt into the fog. The Germans flinch, seek cover, and McNiece uses those 3 precious seconds to sprint across open ground to the stone wall. He drops beside Maddox, breathing hard, Webley still steady in his hand. "Boss, you gotta go," Maddox repeats, voice weaker now. "We're done anyway. Get yourself out." McNiece ignores him. He's already scanning the hedgerows, reading the terrain the way he reads structures before demolition, where stress concentrates, where collapse is inevitable, where one precise intervention might hold everything together a few seconds longer. 2 rounds left, maybe 8 Germans still mobile. The Webley feels lighter now, its weight familiar despite being a stranger's weapon from another army. Across the farmyard, beyond the fog, a German NCO is making similar calculations. He's lost 3 men to a single shooter. The shots are too precise, too calm. This isn't a panicked paratrooper burning ammunition. This is someone who knows exactly what they're doing. The NCO gestures to his remaining squad. Split and advance. Suppress the barn. Don't give the American time to think. The Germans coordinate their push. 3 men break cover simultaneously from different angles. Classic fire and maneuver, the kind of disciplined assault that should overwhelm a lone defender. McNiece's steady hands move like he's crimping a blasting cap, precise, unhurried, final. 5th shot drops the lead German mid-stride. 6th shot forces the others to ground. The Webley's cylinder spins empty. McNiece doesn't reload. He has no ammunition left. But the Germans don't know that. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The Webley's cylinder is empty, but McNiece stands fully visible above the stone wall, silhouette clear, revolver raised. Fog thinning just enough for the Germans in the hedgerows to see him, see the weapon, see the deliberate stance, see the absolute stillness of a man who hasn't missed yet. It's a bluff built on nerve and the brutal mathematics of what the Germans have already witnessed. 5 of their men are down. 5 shots, 5 hits. From their perspective, the American shooter hasn't wasted a single round. The kind of precision that suggests either a gifted marksman or someone with ammunition to spare, and the patience to make every shot count. They can't see the empty cylinder, can't see McNiece's pulse hammering in his throat, can't see the calculation behind the calm, that fear respects certainty more than firepower, and sometimes the threat of violence holds more power than violence itself. McNiece learned this principle from demolitions. On night missions near Carentan, he'd rig single charges on bridge approaches, small, precise, barely enough TNT to wound the structure. But the Germans would see wires, smell cordite, hear the click of a timer, and retreat. Not because the explosion would kill them, because the possibility created more terror than certainty. A bridge might collapse, a road might crater, and that might was enough to freeze entire columns, while McNiece and his squad melted back into the bocage darkness. Now he applies the same geometry to this frozen moment. He stares down the hedgerows, Webley steady, posture broadcasting absolute confidence. The message is clear. I have rounds left. I will use them. You will die if you move. The German NCO behind the hedgerow faces his own impossible math. He's lost 3 men, maybe 4, if the one with the shattered shoulder doesn't get aid soon. The American shooter is exposed but hasn't missed yet. Standard doctrine says, suppress and advance. But doctrine assumes facing a normal enemy, not someone who just put 5 rounds through 5 targets in fog and chaos without wasting ammunition. The NCO makes his choice. He signals withdrawal, not retreat, withdrawal. Tactical, controlled, preserving his remaining squad. They melt back into the hedgerows, moving laterally first, then deeper into the bocage network. Within 30 seconds, the German voices fade. Boots squelching through mud grow distant. The fog swallows them. McNiece holds his position for another 10 seconds. Then 20, then a full minute, Webley still raised, listening for the pattern of return, boots reversing direction, whispered commands, the distinctive metallic sounds of Germans preparing to rush. Nothing comes, just fog and silence, and the wet rasp of Benson's ruined lung behind him. He lowers the Webley slowly. His hands shake now. Delayed reaction. Adrenaline crash. The body finally processing what the mind had suppressed. He drops behind the wall, legs suddenly boneless, and Maddox grabs his sleeve with a grip stronger than his shattered leg should allow. "How many you got left?" Maddox asks. McNiece shows him the empty cylinder. Maddox stares, then laughs, half hysteria, half something close to religious awe. "You son of a bitch, you stood up with nothing." "Not nothing," McNiece mutters, hands still trembling as he closes the Webley's brake action. Had geometry, had their fear, had 5 good shots that made him believe in number 6. Kowalski, consciousness fading in and out, whispers something that might be a prayer or might be a curse. Benson just breathes, each wet inhale a small miracle of survival. And McNiece sits with his back against cold stone, British revolver resting across his knees, waiting for American voices to find them through the fog. Medics, stretchers, friendly patrol, something. The Webley sits heavier now than when it was loaded. Not because of its weight, because McNiece understands what he just did. Bet 3 men's lives on psychology and the illusion of ammunition he didn't have. If the Germans had called the bluff, if they'd rushed together, if any single factor had shifted. But it didn't. The geometry held. And that knowledge, that he made fear and fog and an empty revolver last long enough to see dawn, becomes something he'll carry forward into every bridge demolition, every roadblock, every impossible situation where the math says failure, but instinct whispers, maybe. American voices filter through the fog 20 minutes later, a 506th PIR patrol, medics with stretchers, someone shouting coordinates into a radio. They find McNiece still crouched by the wall, Webley across his knees, 3 wounded men alive because geometry and nerve held when firepower ran dry. An officer, Lieutenant Marsh, Company XO, stares at the scene. 5 dead Germans scattered across the farmyard, precise shot placement, defensive position that should have been overrun. "Jesus, McNiece, how much ammo did you burn through?" McNiece shows him the Webley's empty cylinder. 6 rounds total. Marsh counts German bodies again, does the math, looks at McNiece with something between respect and disbelief. "You held them with 6 shots?" "5, McNiece corrects quietly. "Used one to make noise. Last one dropped their point man." What he doesn't say, what the after-action report will never capture, is the terror that lived inside those careful trigger pulls. The way his stomach churned with each German who appeared. The prayer-like counting in his head. 1 down, 5 left, 4 left, 3 left. The moment he realized the cylinder was empty and his next choice was either run or commit to the most dangerous bluff of his life. The citation that follows, weeks later, will call it extraordinary valor under fire and exemplary marksmanship in defense of wounded comrades. Clean language, heroic framing, the kind of words that look good on paper and make the action sound inevitable, as if McNiece simply executed perfect tactics against inferior opposition. But McNiece remembers different truths. He remembers the German boy, maybe 19, who died first, whose young face looked surprised more than afraid. Remembers the NCO who made the smart call to withdraw instead of spending more lives on a position that seemed defended by someone with unlimited ammunition and supernatural calm. Remembers standing exposed above that wall with an empty revolver, heart hammering so hard he thought the Germans could hear it, betting everything on their fear and his reputation. The Filthy 13 hear the story in pieces over the following days. Some details McNiece shares. Others the wounded men tell, especially Maddox, who watched those steady hands work through impossible mathematics and never flinch. But there are parts McNiece keeps private, the way his hands shook for hours afterward. The nightmares where the bluff fails and the Germans rush, and Maddox, Benson and Kowalski die screaming while he stands useless with an empty gun. The quiet knowledge that what looked like courage was 50% luck, 30% psychology, and maybe 20% skill, Benson survives, barely. Evacuated to England, punctured lung repaired by surgeons who say another 10 minutes and he'd have drowned in his own blood. He tells everyone about McNasty's steady hands with a British officer's revolver. Kowalski loses the arm but keeps his life and swears to anyone who'll listen that he counted each shot like watching a demolition expert crimp charges, methodical, certain, never rushed. Maddox recovers enough to return to the 506th PIR before Holland. One night in a Belgian barn, months later, he asks McNiece the question that matters. "Did you know it would work? The bluff?" McNiece stares at the Webley. He'd kept it through Normandy, carried it as a secondary weapon, though he never fired it again. "No. Thought we were dead. Thought I was going to watch you three bleed out while I stood there with nothing. But you stood anyway. What else could I do? Run and live with leaving you? Stay and maybe make them believe I had what I needed?" Maddox nods slowly. That's the part they don't put in citations. The maybe. The choice when you don't know if it'll work. The official record never mentions the empty cylinder, never mentions the bluff, never mentions the terror or the luck or the thin psychological edge that made frightened Germans withdraw instead of rush. It just says Sergeant McNiece defended wounded men with extraordinary valor, as if valor was simple, as if steady hands came naturally, as if the geometry of courage didn't require betting your life and others' lives on calculations that might collapse at any second. McNiece keeps the Webley through Holland, Bastogne, Germany, not as a trophy, as a reminder that sometimes the most heroic actions live in the narrowest margins between success and catastrophe. That what others see as certainty was often doubt, fear, and a desperate gamble that happened to work. That the weight of steady hands isn't in their stillness. It's in carrying the knowledge of how easily they could have failed. The Webley vanishes somewhere in Germany, spring of 1945, lost in a river crossing, stolen from a gear pile, or simply left behind in some Belgian foxhole. McNiece never remembers exactly when or where. One day it's in his kit, the next it's gone. He doesn't report it, doesn't look for it. Some part of him is almost relieved to let the physical object disappear, even if the memory of what it represents never does. Decades later, the story lives in different forms. Military historians write about the 506th PIR's Normandy operations, mentioning Sergeant McNiece's defense of wounded paratroopers with limited ammunition. Veteran reunions hear Maddox's version, embellished slightly, the way good war stories always are, emphasizing McNasty's supernatural calm and perfect shot placement. Kowalski, one-armed and proud, tells his grandchildren about the demolition NCO who held off a German squad with 6 bullets and no fear. But McNiece's version, when he tells it at all, is quieter, less heroic, more honest about the luck and terror and impossible choices that don't make good stories, but make true ones. He remembers the geometry, not just of angles and trigger pulls, but of the thin line between courage and recklessness, between tactical brilliance and desperate gambling with other men's lives. In 1982, a researcher interviews McNiece for an oral history project. She asks about the Normandy action, reading from the citation. McNiece listens to the official language: extraordinary valor, exemplary marksmanship, selfless devotion to duty, and almost laughs. That what it says? That's what it says. Is it accurate? McNiece is quiet for a long moment. Accurate enough for paper. Leaves out the scared part, the stupid lucky part. The part where I stood up with nothing and hoped to God they couldn't see my hands shaking inside my head. But you did stand. Yeah, I stood. Because what's the alternative? Watch my men die? Run and live with that? The researcher scribbles notes. McNiece stares past her, seeing fog and hedgerows, and the weight of a British revolver that felt too light for the work it had to do. He'd carried many weapons through the war. M1 Garand, Thompson, captured Mausers, satchels of TNT. But the Webley, used exactly once for 6 shots and one impossible bluff, weighs heavier in memory than any of them. What McNiece never tells the researcher, what he rarely tells anyone, is how the sound of trains crossing bridges still brings him back to that morning. The rumble of wheels on steel, the geometric certainty of structure under stress, the thin line between holding and collapsing. He'll be standing in a station or driving under a railway overpass, and suddenly he's 24 again, revolver empty. German voices in the fog, making split-second calculations about fear and nerve, and how long psychology can hold when physics says everything should fail. Maddox dies in 1994. Heart attack, peaceful, surrounded by family. At the funeral, McNiece and the handful of surviving Filthy 13 members share stories. Someone mentions the farmyard, the Webley, the 6 shots. They laugh about it, the kind of dark, affectionate humor that only men who lived through such moments can share. But later, standing by Maddox's grave, McNiece thinks about what his friend asked him in that Belgian barn. Did you know it would work? The honest answer is still no. He didn't know, couldn't know. Just made the choice that felt less impossible than the alternative, and got lucky that fear and fog and 5 good shots created enough doubt to make Germans withdraw instead of rush. The legend says McNasty held off a German squad with steady hands and perfect aim. The truth is, he was terrified, half-guessing, betting on psychology when ammunition ran out. The legend says 6 shots. The truth says 5 shots and 1 empty threat that happened to work. The legend says hero. The truth says scared young man who chose to stand when running would have been easier. Both versions are real, but only one weighs anything years later when the fog rolls in, and McNiece remembers what steady hands actually cost, not just in the moment, but in the decades of carrying memories that official citations and reunion stories can never quite capture. The Webley is gone. The war is gone. Most of the men who were there are gone. But the weight of those 6 chambers, 5 loaded, 1 empty, all of them heavier than any citation, stays with him until the end. If this story reminded you that behind every medal and mission report, there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.